Hi, I'm Jackie Tantillo, and this is Should Have Listened to My Mother. It's always wonderful to share great news about this podcast, and thanks to all of our listeners. Should Have Listened to My Mother is a 2023 People's Choice Podcast Award nominee. Be sure to tell a friend and spread the word, and we all share this universal thread of our relationship with our mother and what we've learned from her or in spite of her. And now it's time to introduce this week's guest on Should Have Listened to My Mother. A son who undeniably loved his mother, possibly understood her better than most. Yet she had a wild side. Robert says his mom was a product of the swinging 60s. She loved to party, hang out at gay bars, ride a Harley, and conversely, she was a suburban mom who loved to celebrate Christmas in a big way, though they were Jewish. Plus, she was a great cook. She left a lasting impression on her son, Robert Shaffron, now a father and real estate agent in New Jersey. Robert is an award-winning playwright and has an extensive background in marketing and production as a former creative director in the advertising industry. Robert and his husband of 36 years are raising two beautiful, almost grown sons, and I'm curious if they've gotten to know their grandmother through their father. I guess we're going to find out. Robert Shaffron, welcome to Should Have Listened to My Mother.
Thank you, Jackie. How are you? It's great to be here.
It's always a pleasure to tap into someone who's really trusting me and open and ready to share sometimes often very personal stories about their mom. So I'm really grateful and thankful that you joined me today.
Well, thanks. You know, it's interesting. As you were speaking, I realized that obviously for almost everyone, mothers are a very kind of hot button issue. The fact is my mother passed away when I was 20, and that was almost 50 years ago. So I do have a lot of distance on it so that, you know, a lot of the feelings aren't necessarily raw or recent. But at the same time, I still do, you know, have that kind of instantaneous emotional response when thinking about her and when talking about her. And I wonder if I haven't made a little bit of a mythology about it, again, having passed so much time since she left us. So take all that I say with a grain of salt, knowing that it's far in the past, and then I may have built it up a little bit in my head as I've lived with it over the years.
But I think that's to be expected, isn't it? The essence of this woman, this mother, this role model, hopefully a role model, has been missing for a huge part of your life. So, of course, things are going to get turned around, hopefully for the better, right?
Yeah.
I was thinking, do you share these stories of your mom with your boys?
I do. And my boys are now 20 and 22, so they pretty much get it all. There's some stuff that I still don't share, but you know, they never obviously got to know her. So she just exists also as a bit of a myth that comes from me. But sometimes I just share with them the same things that I guess anybody else would, little like household tips. I will never forget that it was my mother who taught me that cold water dissolves bubbles in the sink when you're washing dishes faster than hot water. Now, I know that's incredibly trivial, but that's something I remember she taught me and that I have shared with my children.
I didn't know that.
Well, assuming it's true, I'm trusting my mother telling me the truth. But yeah.
Was your mom a good student? Based on the little bit that I know of her, was she attentive in school at all? She seems like she must be very smart. To me, she was very, very smart. I mean, she obviously opened my eyes to a lot of things. She never went beyond high school. I think she may have started a year of college, but she married pretty young. She was 19 when she married my dad. I do know that when she was in high school, this is not apropos of being a good learner, but one of the family legends was that she was dancing on the steps of the high school with an African-American man, which in 1947 or 48 might have been considered a little radical. And her father, who was a policeman, arrested her for that outrageous display. So
That's kind of who my mother
Wow.
was from the very beginning.
That's quite a
And of
setup.
course,
Where was this geographically? Where did she grow up?
Philadelphia, and I did in suburban Philadelphia.
So she had to have gotten that brilliant gene from somebody to appreciate all races and creeds and colors. I guess not her dad.
Yeah, not her dad. Well, her mother's side of the family came over from Latvia, and her grandfather was quite a bit of a socialist and brought that ideal. So that whole left wing thingy, is deeply embedded from way back.
What is your mom's name, and how did you refer to your mom?
I called her mommy or mom. I don't think we ever got to the mother years. Her name was Rita Geraldine Rosenberg Shaffron. The family called her Tootsie, and I think that was given to her by her grandmother when she was an infant. But to be perfectly honest, I'm not sure. We have parts of her family who called her Tootsie and parts of her family who called her Rita.
So was this brave, or brazen, I guess,
Brazen,
to some
yeah.
people, dancing with this person of color? Did she continue that path out of revenge to her dad to prove herself? Or is that part of what was going on?
She and her father had a really tumultuous relationship. And I think it was kind of the definition of a love-hate thing because, they saw one another constantly, but there was always a lot of anger and bitterness. I guess maybe he just didn't approve of her. But I think she did a lot of stuff in spite of her father, or maybe perhaps to provoke her father. And he did the same thing back to her. But she always kind of made unconventional choices when I was a little bit older. My mother, I don't want to say frequently, but a couple of times brought people into our home who either had no place else to go. And I'm not saying they're homeless people, but people who had suffered some kind of separation or had some kind of depression to live with us. So it was not unusual that there was another person living in our home. Adult men, I think a couple of them were gay men, although at the time that was not something that was discussed or out. And that was just kind of how things were in my life. I didn't think of that as being particularly unusual. And it wasn't until I was much older that I found out that they had been gay men. My mother had some kind of affinity with the gay community that my father wanted no parts of. My father was a very traditional American Jew, and my mother was a very unconventional person.
So what was it that brought them together, do you think? Opposites attract? And then you figured out?
Honestly, I think it was lust. I just think they really, really wanted each other. And in 1947, 48, if you were a woman, well, at least in our family, if you were a woman who wanted to sleep with a guy, you married him. So then you could sleep with him. I don't know if that's true or how widespread that really was, but that's the kind of myth of that era. So I think that they had the hots for each other. They were about 11 or 12 years apart in age. My mother was 19. And, my father thought she was a hottie.
What was your mom's relationship with her mom, your maternal grandmother?
Basically pretty good. It was a pretty good relationship. It was a lot more peaceful than my mother's relationship with her father. My grandmother's name was Dinah Rosenberg. And they hung out a fair amount. They smoked a lot of cigarettes together. And every Sunday, we went to Nana and Papa's house for dinner, which we referred to as the Sunday night fights, because our grandparents bickered a great deal and they were very funny. And there wasn't much tension between my mother and her mother. I think a lot of the difficulty was between my mother and her father. And Nana and I were very, very, very close. I think I was her favorite. You don't have to tell everybody that, but I was Nana's
I
favorite.
probably agree with you. Speaking of which, did your mom have siblings?
She had a brother, Norman, and they were very, very, very good friends until some point in the relationship, and I don't remember what sparked it, when they became bitter enemies. My mother was a little nuts, and so the family regarded her that way, and they weren't necessarily warm or helpful or welcoming because she was a real handful. And I'm not sure at which point things between them became difficult. But I remember when I was little, we all got along just great.
How nice is that?
Yeah.
So she finishes high school, gets married.
Yeah.
Do you have siblings? How many babies did your mom have?
My mother had my sister first in 1950, and I was 5 years behind. And my father, at the time, I think when they married, he was delivering milk for a living. My father, never made it out of high school. So he was generally a blue-collar worker. And I think part of the foundation, the friction, whatever you want to call it, in their relationship was that she wanted to live a kind of privileged, high-class life. And my father was essentially a working guy, and money wasn't plentiful. So basically, throughout most of my childhood, I, again, didn't know it much at the time, but we lived well beyond our means because my father was, they tried to open a restaurant when I was little, and I believe the restaurant was in Atlantic City and called Roberts, named for me, or vice versa. And that failed. And for most of my childhood, my father was a wholesale meat salesman. And, he didn't make a lot of money, although it was a time when generally one parent worked, and it was usually the father, and the mother stayed home and did what the mother did. And somehow you survived on one income, and we lived in a row house in suburban Philadelphia. But on the side, my father was a bookie because he loved to gamble and he needed the additional income.
And the plot thickens.
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff. There's a lot of stuff. So they were, I think that my father had a very difficult time managing and dealing with my mother because she was a wild child, and he just wanted a nice, quiet Jewish life with Shabbos candles. And that was just not Rita in any way, shape, or form. So there was a lot of friction. My parents split up, I think, 3 different times throughout my childhood, apart and together, apart and together. And, all of this was what I grew up in. And I guess I suspected, I knew it wasn't conventional. And there were times that I wish I just had a, normal mom at home baking brownies family, but I didn't. And this was my norm, even though I knew it wasn't everybody else's norm.
So you were aware of that. Did you try and hide what was going on at home?
To some degree, I think there was a mix of embarrassment that my family, particularly my mother, was so kind of nuts, and a little bit of pride that she was unconventional and that she did these outlandish things. I mean, my sister was horrified by the whole thing.
She was that much older than you, right? The 5 years.
She was 5 years older than me. In fact, I just got off the phone with her 5 minutes ago. So we're still very close. Speaking of my sister, it's very interesting because if you speak to her and you speak to me, you'll get very different perspectives on my mom. There was a lot of anger and bitterness between my mother and my sister. And so, for whatever reason, my mother's behavior irked my sister in a way that just didn't bother me. My sister was really embarrassed, and there was a lot of heated stuff between the two of them. And my sister to this day claims that I didn't see it, but it may well have been true, that I was the favored child, possibly just because I was the male child, which happens in a lot of families. But beyond that, I just felt a real closeness with my mother, and I think she felt a real closeness with me that was not there with my sister.
How did she show that special relationship?
There was. Well, we spent a lot of time, just the two of us, talking and laughing and learning. There was a physical element to it. She hugged me a lot, and she called me Ra. I mean, my name is Robert, and when I was a boy, the family knew me as Robbie, but she called me Ra, which nobody else did, and that was a little special thing for me. But we just felt very, very connected in a way that she and my sister didn't. My sister and my father were very, very close and connected in a way that my father and I were not. My father and I, there was always a lot of discord between me and my dad. And now that I grew up, I realized I was a total to him. And he didn't understand me because I was more like my mother. And he thought we were both kind of just, on the fringe of things that he didn't relate to at all. Just different personality types.
Yeah, and that is common, right?
Yeah,
and I can
absolutely,
understand your
absolutely.
sister's perspective because she was older and her eyes were wide open.
Absolutely.
And you were younger, and those things probably weren't even on your radar. You've mentioned the word nuts or crazy a couple of times. Your mom and her behavior. Was that something that was ever clinically diagnosed, or she just was wild?
It actually was. No, it actually was. And, again, at the time, I was a kid. And generally, our culture wasn't as sophisticated about mental illness at the time. But she was in and out of a few psychiatric wards. Psych wards, whatever we call them then. I believe she did undergo a little bit of shock therapy. And, we were used to our mother being in and out of places. She had a physical ailment. She was basically a chronic asthmatic. And so she was in and out of the hospital a few times for that. She was in and out of the psych ward and I don't know what the break moments were, because I was a kid, but I know that she took a lot of diet pills. It was the 60s. You took diet pills. I know she drank a great deal. I wasn't aware at the time that she was probably smashed half the time I knew her, but I wasn't aware of that. But she drank a lot. Took the diet pills, and I think she also smoked pot and experimented with drugs. And so she was in and out of mental institutions a couple of times throughout my childhood. And she did really irrational things. We woke up one day, and she'd been pretty far gone by this time. And she had just taken the car and driven to Chicago and put herself in a boarding house. I don't know why. I don't know what precipitated that. May have had something to do with a blow up between her and her father. So we lived with that stuff. And again, and it's the passage of time, but I have pretty much filtered out a lot of the pain and discomfort of that. And again, now it's just a story. At the time, I imagine I might have been pretty shattered by some of that stuff. But again, in the bigger picture, that was Mom. That was those were the things that we'd come to expect of her. But again, by the same token, I never felt anything but really loved and embraced and supported by her. And so I don't like it to turn into a story of, my crazy mom. That's a part of it.
Sure. Well, because she was sick.
She was sick. And, I guess we knew, and that was our reality. One time, and this is a really interesting kind of combination of the two of them. My father, as I said, was a gambler and a bookie. And apparently, I didn't know why, but I came home and we had a little breakfast nook off the kitchen in our little row home. And my mother had slashed all the wallpaper off and drawn kind of strange little gambling expressions on the wall and drawn pictures of dice And again, the wallpaper was hanging from the walls, and I had no idea what this tantrum was about, but it was pretty extreme. And later realized apparently my father had gambled all our money away. And that was her way of reacting, was to kind of destroy this room, or the wallpaper in the room,
Lash
to
out.
punish him, to lash out. Yeah.
Which came first, a spendthrift mom or your dad's gambling? It kind of broke your mom for sure.
Yeah. Well, it ruined them. I think he had a gambling addiction in addition to having it be his income. And again, they never revealed their finances to us. I know that we moved a lot, but we also had a maid 5 days a week. We ate very well. I think that I just presume my father lived in horrible debt all of his life. And my mother was having none of it. She was going to live the life that she wanted to live and have the things she wanted to have, and new cars and a fur coat.
Wow.
And
amazing.
I mean, and none of it, I wasn't able to logic through any of that as a kid. And I was 20 when she died. So, I didn't have much worldly awareness.
Yeah, you were still a kid.
I was still a kid. So I just knew we had the life we had. But, it must have been very, very, very difficult for my father. And I didn't realize that. I don't think I gave him a break at that time. I kind of, there was some disdain, I think, that my mother had for him. And I think I adopted that, which was an absolutely horrible thing for a child to do, to be that way towards his father, to feel disdainful towards his father. But I can't undo it. And
right,
when he was...
Go ahead.
When he was older and coming towards the end of his life, he actually did come and he lived with me. And we kind of, we bonded. I don't say we repaired anything, because we never went over any apologies or went over the past, or we just were together and appreciative of one another. Sorry, I didn't expect to get this emotional. And that was a nice time. It was an interesting time because this isn't about my mother, but my father was, as I said, a very traditional kind of conventional Jewish guy from Philadelphia. He wasn't enlightened. He wasn't particularly educated. He was very, very funny and warm and outgoing, and also rather bigoted. But he was an equal opportunity bigot. He had a disdainful name for every single group in the world. And my husband is an African American Catholic man, so he is absolutely everything my father thought should not be, obviously. And somehow when my father came to live with us, he and my husband developed their own little working relationship. And it was fascinating to see.
It's out of ignorance, I believe, that one creates these parameters, limitations, and walls while expressing horrific sentiments of hatred. And until the dynamics become personal, it won't change.
Yeah, but it broke down, and they found a nice little working relationship. He was living with us up until he died, and he and John had their own little thing going on.
I'm glad that really happened. That's fantastic.
I am too. I'm really glad.
But now I got to talk about your mom.
Yeah. My mom, I think, would have been a lot more embracing of the situation, if only because, it would have been considered unconventional. The fact that I had a husband, the fact that he's African American, I think she would have had a very different perspective. Technically, my mom died not knowing that I was gay. I had never said it to her. I think, as in most families, my family always knew that I was, or suspected that I was gay. We just didn't have that conversation. But as I mentioned, my mom used to hang out in gay bars, and she had a lot of gay friends. We never had that conversation on a personal level. And so she died before I got to have that conversation with her. I did hear a funny story just a few years ago from my cousin Richie, of all people, who years ago apparently caught my mother in bed with another woman, which was news to me. So Mom may have been bisexual, but I had no idea about that at the time.
It doesn't matter, right?
Well, it doesn't matter, but I would have loved to be able to share all those things with her. The fact that I'm gay, the fact that she was bisexual. You know, we never got to relate to each other as adults. And, you know, I don't even know if our relationship would have survived long enough because she was, you know, she had some self-destructive tendencies and some generally destructive tendencies. So it was almost fitting that she didn't live that long because that's what she did. She did a lot of self-destructive things.
But also conversations between a mom and a child, one's intuition often is a good enough answer.
It has to be.
So,
yeah,
you know.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
Especially in this case. So your mom loved you is all that matters, no matter gay, straight.
She did. She did. Yeah, she did.
You talked about her hanging out in gay bars and drinking a lot and the center of attention. But I would love to hear a little bit more about her picking you up at elementary school on her Harley.
Yeah, well, she somehow or another back in the 60s again, she found this group of motorcyclists called the Warlocks. I guess they were like a mini Hells Angels. I don't know. I didn't know much about it. But she ended up befriending them, and she got a motorcycle, and she would ride with them. So that's how she got around. She had a motorcycle, which of course absolutely mortified my father. He thought this was, you know, insane. But she picked me up from school on a motorcycle. I mean, that's how we got around. And we didn't wear helmets back then, which was incredibly freeing. It's a fabulous feeling to ride on a motorcycle without a helmet. Yeah, but that's just how she got around. And I thought it was, you know, I thought it was pretty cool at the time. Again, my sister thought it was just shocking and horrible, embarrassing. But, you know, I thought it was pretty cool that my mom drove a motorcycle.
That's very cool. Oh, my goodness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Robert Shaffron. We're just scratching the surface here about your mom, Rita. So I really thank you for joining us. And again, Robert Shaffron, real estate, you help clients through one of the most stressful times in their life, buying and selling a home.
I do.
And I've heard, based on your reviews online, you seem to have a lot of the wonderful characteristics that your mom had. You were kind and patient and a great sense of humor. And if you lose any of that during a time of buying or selling a house, you're going to really have a tough time.
Yeah. Realtor/therapist is pretty much how it comes down.
I got to hold their hand.
It's a huge, huge undertaking, sure. Thank you so much, Jackie. It's been great chatting with you. We ran out of time very quickly.
It goes very fast.
Good luck with the podcast, and congratulations on your nomination.
Isn't that the best? But I couldn't have done it without my guests and listeners. Robert Shaffron, thank you so much for joining me.
Good to talk to you.
And we'll be back next week with another episode of Should Have Listened to My Mother.